Hi, today we're going to talk about dual processing accounts of reasoning, judgment, and social cognition by Johnson Amos. I'm Christy.
I'm Pam.
I'm Molly.
So before the author dives into his argument, he encapsulated the concept of dual process theories by exploring the current literature at that time. It is a fictional account of how our cognitive thinking can be attributed to two systems. System one is responsible for actions that are unconscious, fast, and automatic, heuristic, meaning that the learning or discovery is rather spontaneous, associative with context, could be seen as a stimulus response. A useful analogy of System 1 could be an apparatus for receiving updates. On the other hand, System 2 could be hypothetically responsible for conscious, effortful, and controlled behaviors that have an analytical underlying. It is also rule-based rather than context-dependent, so it allows us to do higher-order tasks, such as logical reasoning, judgment, and social recognition.
After doing critical review of the current literature at that time, Evans' first argument is that the existing theories as of 2007 provides accounts for the two systems that are rather incoherent. For example, some literature suggests that System 2, or the so-called conscious mind, is uniquely human. However, scientists have shown that there are in fact distinctions between stimulus response and higher order behaviors in animals, like primates and rodents.
Moving on, Evans's second argument is that we are better off to think in terms of type 1 and type 2 processes, rather than system 1 and system 2. So he emphasizes that system 1 and 2 are fictional and hypothetical, but he finds that all theories similarly points to a dichotomy of characteristics. Thus, he argues that it would make sense to think in terms of two types of processes. So type 2 process have the type characteristics of requiring access to capacity limited central working memory, whereas type 1 does not require that. Furthermore, Evans argues that a slow type 2 effort can be transformed into a fast type 1 response over time. So you can recall the first time we ordered Starbucks, we might have spent a long time to figure out the sizing ambiguities and what flavors we like versus your most recent order, which might have taken maybe under 1 minute. And if you have taken data science courses, at the beginning, you might have to look up all the naming conventions of the libraries. And by the 50th time you do it, it will become more of a muscle memory to import those libraries. So Evans's third argument is that the two types of processes are not singularly related to their fictional accounts, and that system 2 is not equivalent to the conscious mind. Moreover, he argues that type 1 and type 2 processes could often interfere. So he drew from the famous experiment by Watson about deductive reasoning, in which you are shown 4 cards and be asked the question, which cards should you turn over to check if a card that shows an even number on one side and the opposite side shows a red color. So less than 10% of the participants were correct. Although they were instructed to use logical reasoning, they were rationalizing unconsciously because the context was rather abstract and unfamiliar to them. Whereas when people were given a real life context, for example, if a person's drinking beer in a bar, the person must be over 21 years. So who would you check for drinking law violations, the beer drinker or the soda drinker? So most participants in this experiment were right, and they were able to use their logical reasoning because the context given was familiar. So these two experiments show how the type 1 and 2 processes could often interfere with one another because it would depend on the context. So when we think about the implications for technology regarding the dual process theories, it's useful to take a look at the applications of AI. We can recall the definitions of System 1 and 2 brought up by Christy.
However, when we actually look into the different characteristics of System 1 and 2, we figure out that AI actually has both of them. To begin with, the AI is unconscious. Even though there's an operational definition of consciousness, that consciousness requires access to a central working memory system of limited capacity, this seems to be very true of the computer, that it actually has a memory unit of limited capacity. This definition actually just work on the human mind. We learn from the mistakes we take before, and we often look back on the experiences that is stored in our memory to make our decisions. However, computers, they compute real time. They make decisions based on the data they have right now and do the operations. And therefore, we can think that the AI is unconscious. Next, the AI is fast and automatic. The computing power of the current day computer is very immense. And there is a Moore's law that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles about every 2 years, and we know that the computer power is advancing in an unimaginable speed. However, we can also seem to find more characteristics of AI that appears in System 2, that it is analytic and rule-based. We know that the computer works upon logical operations, and it is reasonable when they are doing decisions. And they also follow a hierarchy of tasks. So we can say that they follow the higher order of tasks. How about we look into the present day AI? And there are so many categories that we know right now that is related to AI, like machine learning, natural language processing, speech, vision, robotics, etc. But they all very limited to their own context, and they perform simple tasks. So we can say that they are weak AI. How about the future? Because right now AI is based on models. They have narrow context. They require corrected input data, and they're brittle. But how about the future? Maybe we can imagine a world that the AI is model free, that it has broad context, that operates on scant evidence, and they're robust. Maybe we can just take inspirations from the dual process theories and produce general AI or even super AI in the future.
While Ewan's theory was popular, there were many comments and discussions from other researchers as well that are related to this topic. For example, Lorma and Martilla believes that besides System 1 and System 2, there is a third cognitive strategy which is crucial to effective decision-making in the strategic context, which is reframing. Reframing refers to deliberate attempts to reflect on and rethink the parameters and background assumptions underlying how one approaches to a particular situation. It is distinguished from the other two cognitive strategies in having an explicit focus on not solving the given problem at hand and arriving at a decision, but rather in allocating attention to the way the problem itself is understood. The actual process of reframing can also happen both consciously and non-consciously. So clearly, there could be more potential way to explain the cognition process beyond System 1 and System 2. As we learned from the lecture review, these dual processing accounts could have significant influence on advertising and marketing. And right now, visual effects play a huge role of those fields. So we want to talk a little bit more about cognition process of the pictures, visual effects, and the System 1. According to Ewan's theory, the cognition process when people first saw a picture falls into System 1 since it's unconscious, fast, and automatic. However, it's been brought up by Lazar and other researchers that influential message processing begins at the initial moment of exposure to the pictures and visual effects. Processing that is not accounted for in widely used dual process models for persuasive communication. Furthermore, visual could also influence on other factors such as emotions at the initial stage of information processing.
There has also been research on developing System 1 processes and how it affects learning behavior. So a study shows that if System 1 processes are learned over time, development, such as having social reward, then the speed and extent of learning will be affected. In other words, System 1 processes that are normally regarded as unconscious, fast, could also have effects on the System 2 learning process that requires a lot of effort. So in conclusion, as Evans emphasized repeatedly, the notion of System 1 and 2 are fictional. However, the dual process theories are still very meaningful for future research, especially for building model-free AIs that are more powerful and efficient, or establishing visual effects in enhancing user experience or advertising, and improving learning outcomes, etc. And thank you for listening to our presentation.